our schedule. We try to accept donations to try to pay the rent for this community center. They badly need the rent, and so we have a can back there by the door. We always have it back there for donations. Please feel free to leave something in it. I don't think we have any other business to attend, so I'm going to introduce John Sprunger. Not only does John and Allison have been residents of Georgetown for about 5 years, and they're very active. Among other things, they belong to the Georgetown Trust Board and the Historic Georgetown Board and several others. But John in particular has become a pretty good expert on mushrooms, and not only does he know how to pick them, but he knows how to cook them as well. I had the pleasure of having his chanterelle rice about a week ago, and it was delicious. So, John Sprunger.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm going to talk a lot about mushrooms tonight. Let's see. I should probably use this here.
I think a good title would be Fun with Fun Guy.
You don't know how many titles I went through. Let me pick this one. Okay, great. Can you hear me good? Okay, so thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to talk about mushrooms quite a bit here and how to safely forage and eat them in Clear Creek, locally here. The first time I practiced it, it took almost 3 hours. You wouldn't believe the amount of content I had to cut. So there's a lot to get through, and I would ask you to try to remember your questions until the end. And at the end, we're going to give away some mushroom foraging books as well here. Okay, my background, I've had a nearly 20-year career as a software developer and consultant, which I think has given me a sense of attention to detail, which is strongly required for mushroom foraging. I learned our mushrooms locally here, though I've been foraging plants and berries throughout my life. I joined the Colorado Mycological Society a few years ago to volunteer as a foray assistant and leader. So I've assisted and led on about 10 forays now, where we take folks from the public out to give them a biological tour of mushrooms, and I'll talk more about that later. Some guy on Facebook said I look like I'm 15 years old and I'm not a mycologist, so I'm going to get us all killed, which is a great compliment because I'm about to turn 41 next week. And a mycologist is anybody who studies mushrooms. So you don't need to be old and you don't need to be a professional to study mushrooms and eat them safely. So I hope to prove that to you. This is just a brag, but I've eaten over 40 different mushrooms just within the past few years. I've learned that I've been a little bit more adventurous than some people. And my focus, a lot of people focus on researching mushrooms, or you can spend an entire career just on one genus as a grad student. I focus on the edible ones primarily, and I also really enjoy just unique ones and interesting ones that you can identify visually. So my goals for tonight: teach you just some basic mushroom facts in biology, dispel some common mushroom myths and establish some base facts, and have everybody walk out of here with the confidence that they can safely forage and eat some total beginner mushrooms. And share with you some of my favorite mushrooms that are local here to Clear Creek. Like I said, I think anybody can go foraging. I'm going to liken it to skiing. Anybody, or at least most people, can ski the bunny hill, right? And so what's also great about the hobby is, just by chance, I think all of the easiest and safest to identify mushrooms are also the most delicious ones. And so it just makes it really easy to get into this. You can stay at this level, your whole life and never. Some people go out and just forage, boletes or morels only, which is totally fine. And they're both great, safe mushrooms to ID. So beginner mushrooms to me are ones that have very few or no lookalikes, and those lookalikes aren't even poisonous. And maybe they are, but some really easy, things to spot, easy things to identify, right? So it's a lot like puffballs. Follow some simple rules, you can stay safe there. You gain some more experience. You can get into like the slightly more difficult to identify guild mushrooms. Advanced mushrooms might be things that require special cooking, or they have deadly lookalikes, or things like that. Point there. So some mushroom biology basics to start with. Just to start with, what are mushrooms and fungi? Fungi are in their own unique kingdom, separate from plants and animals. They evolved separately from plants. They don't use photosynthesis or chlorophyll to produce their energy, but rather they use organic material for energy. Fungi are made up of cells called hyphae, which spread and branch to become the mycelium, which is the white cobweb-looking network that grows underground that they use to collect nutrients of water. And then mushrooms, finally, are the fruit of the fungi. So just like an apple tree, the tree is the fungi, the apples are the fruit. And similar to an apple tree, if you pick a mushroom, you pick an apple, it doesn't harm the tree or the fungi. And then finally, mushrooms produce spores, which fly away on the wind and help the mushroom propagate and grow elsewhere, right? Some people have seen this diagram before. This is a simple version of it, but basically the further away things are from each other on this chart, the less DNA they share. And you'll notice that mammals, humans are over here on the right side, and fungi are right next door in this hierarchy. And what's interesting then is that apparently humans share up to 50% of their DNA with fungi. And so we're like half fungi apparently, much closer related to fungi than we are plants though. Oh, pretty interesting. Just some very brief history of mushroom identification for the History Club, right? If you look at those old vintage posters of mushrooms in like gift shops, rock shop, etc., once you get some mushroom knowledge, you'll notice that like the names on those posters are completely different and wrong than what we call them today. Most of the time, it's kind of amusing. It's because things have evolved so rapidly that those vintage posters are out of date, long out of date. And so the history of mushroom ideas evolved just with advances in science and biology itself. Mushrooms were early on initially classified by their visual similarities. So this mushroom looks like this other one, looks like this other one, and we're going to put them all in the same family together. Then with the invention of microscopes, biologists were able to look more closely at the details like the cells and the spores to find similarities and differences and further group them. And with the advent of DNA sequencing, that completely flipped mushroom ID on its head and broke things down even further. And there's things in this presentation, there's things in books published within the past year or two that are already out of date, basically, on how they're continually looking at the DNA of mushrooms and classifying them into different families. But what I think is cool about the mushroom hobby in general is that the more you learn about mushrooms, the more you realize that we don't really know about mushrooms, the deeper you get into it. It's kind of like outer space. You think it's all nice and clear and easy, and scientists have it figured out, but there's a lot we don't know actually. It's kind of surprising. You'll hear me use Latin names here and there throughout the presentation, and I'll try to use common names mostly, but the Latin names have a capital part, which is the genus, and a lowercase part, which is the species. Sometimes I call genus family, even though that's not biologically accurate. I just call it family, it's easier. But they're used to distinguish the mushrooms and identify relationships between them. And there's nothing wrong with using common names, but they're fairly imprecise as far as mushrooms go. They change from region to region, country to country, and it can get people into trouble. So, and some common names can refer to literally hundreds of different mushrooms. Like false morels, there's literally hundreds of different false morels. So if you want to take your understanding of mushrooms to the next level, it helps to learn the Latin names at least a little bit. You don't have to know them all. There's no proper way to say them, so you don't have to be afraid. But it will take you to the next level of understanding. And sometimes you'll see me just refer to this part, the genus, and I'll talk about that a little more. But there's some mushrooms that are basically visually impossible to distinguish at a species level. And so a lot of mycologists will just work at the genus level is what you'll learn. Because it's like, I don't know what this mushroom is, I'm just gonna call it by its parent name. Okay, so some brief mushroom anatomy, which is very important for looking at the details of a mushroom to identify it. From the bottom up, you have like the mycelium at the bottom. Some have this kind of upside down skirt called a volva. You've got the stem or stalk. Not all mushrooms have one. Some mushrooms have a ring or a skirt here. On the top of the cap, there's a wide variety of detail, anything from lines and circles called zonations and striations to things like scales or feathers or warts, all kinds of different colors and patterns, right? And then on the bottom of the cap is one of the most important things for identifying mushrooms, or at least the easiest part, right? There's typically one of 4 or 3 really different things. You usually have either gills, which is what most people think of, most common. You have pores, things like boletes. It's actually a series of tiny tubes all smushed together. Then some mushrooms like chanterelles have ridges, which are like blunt, hard, false gills. And then some mushrooms have teeth, which are like dangly finger things hanging under the cap.
What mushroom is
What?
featuring the teeth?
Hawkswings, hedgehogs, a bunch I'll show you. I'm not going to go through this, but any good field guide you get will have this diagram as well. But how the gills are attached to the stem can be important in many cases, but I'm really not going to talk about this at all. One thing that's important as you do mushroom ID is to use your imagination and look at a lot of different photos of a given mushroom throughout its different life stages. The amanita, which a lot of people are familiar with, it starts out as a little egg and goes all the way where, when it gets more dry, its cap flips up, right? So any given mushroom can have a bit of variety in how it appears based on its growing conditions. Did it grow smushed under a log? Is it been really dry where the cap flips up? Has it been beaten up by the wind and rain? Had bites taken out of it by a deer, so a lot of variety. This is the last mushroom biology thing, but this can be important for identifying mushrooms too, because it's just one of those baseline either or things about a given mushroom. But we're mainly going to talk about mycorrhizal and saprophytic mushrooms. There's more than this, but mycorrhizal ones, essentially morels are a good example. They grow with trees and plants. The saprophytic mushrooms grow on trees and plants. Their mycelium colonizes the wood here. These grow with trees and plants in a symbiotic relationship and exchange nutrients through their mycelium and things like that. So this can be just one of your baseline facts for, is it growing on the ground or is it growing on a tree? You got different mushrooms. These are oyster mushrooms, by the way. So some just basic mushroom facts to start with. All mushrooms can be touched. There are no mushrooms that are poisonous enough that the toxins can be absorbed through your tough skin. So you can ditch the gloves unless you're squeamish, which is totally fine, but all mushrooms can be touched. All mushrooms can also be tasted, not eaten, but tasted, chewed up, and spit out. Even the world's most deadly mushrooms can be chewed up and spit out. They may taste terrible, but you can taste any mushroom as long as you spit it out and don't ingest it. There's no mushrooms that are toxic enough that they would be absorbed through your saliva or your tongue. There's not many mushrooms where identifying them or tasting them is important for identifying them, but I'll talk about that a little bit more. A lot of people are concerned with mixing toxic and edible mushrooms in the same bag. There's nothing that can be transferred from a toxic mushroom to an edible mushroom that would turn an edible one into a toxic one. So there's nothing to really worry about there. It can be a best practice to keep your mushrooms separated, just for helpful to identify them later, keep them cleaner. If you're worried about, maybe you're absent-minded enough that a toxic one's going to slip into your meal later, that you can keep them separated, right? That's all fine. But otherwise, there's no danger in terms of mixing toxic and edible mushrooms. Okay, so talk about how to forage for mushrooms. Timing is by far the most important thing. Our season here locally in Clear Creek is really August to September, and that's almost it for the most part. It starts as early as April in the city, where oyster mushrooms and morels are popping out right now at the lower elevations. Then it goes up in elevation as the year progresses. The evergreen season starts around mid-July, and then everything starts popping out here in August, and it starts to wind down when the honey mushrooms kind of pop out in October. This is just an example of a snowbank mushroom, which is popping out right now in May at our higher elevations. It's not an edible one, but it's just neat. There's a variety of different mushrooms that are called snowbank mushrooms that grow underneath the snowbanks and then pop out as they recede. These start to come out in May. Where, of course, is the second most important thing. It really helps to know your trees if you're looking for a specific kind of mushrooms. They typically all grow with or on a certain type of tree. They love wet areas, riparian areas, creeks, streams, marshes. They love disturbed areas. Sun-shade mix, it's not a total requirement. They can grow in full sun just fine, but I tend to train my eyes in the shadier areas. They love the edges of things, which could just be confirmation bias, but they love the edges of trails and meadows and roads. There's not many edible mushrooms you're going to look for that grow on trees besides the oyster mushrooms for the most part. So you can typically train your eyes on the ground and avoid the trees unless you're around a lot of dead and dying cottonwood or aspen trees. Then you might keep your eyes open for oysters. If you find a mushroom, that means it's good conditions for that mushroom to grow, and there's typically more nearby, so kind of expand your search radius and keep looking. They also kind of are perennials and come back year over year in the same spots. A great way to find mushrooms is to scope out other people's observations on Facebook and the iNaturalist mobile app. A lot of people share more information than they should about where they're finding mushrooms. So that can be, that's a really great way to just scope out Facebook and see where are people finding stuff and what are they finding right now if you want to go look for mushrooms. And where do you want to avoid? The sides of roads, Forest Service roads probably fine, but I'd pass on the side of I-70, golf courses, dog parks, and avoid mushrooms that are growing directly on mine tailings. I've never seen any though. I've never seen anything growing on mine tailings myself. This is a map from the iNaturalist app, just as an example that shows where everybody has submitted their mushroom observations in our local Georgetown Seville Plume area. So these would all be good hints for places to go look for mushrooms, especially where you see clusters, like over here at the Chicago Creek campground. Okay, some mushroom foraging tips, things to bring foraging, your typical 10 essentials for any hike. You all know how to go hiking and play it safe there. A knife is helpful, pocket knife is fine, you don't need a $45 Opinel. Brush that's not attached to your knife is even better from the dollar store. A foraging basket or bag with holes in it is helpful for two reasons. One, mushrooms decay really quickly when they're enclosed in plastic bags or Tupperware or otherwise. And two, as you pick a mushroom and carry it through the forest, you're taking it on a wild ride that it could have never accomplished on its own. And Johnny Appleseeding its spores as you walk several hours through the woods and help it spread and grow. So you're doing a good thing for the environment. Wax paper or brown paper bags are also good to bring just to keep your mushrooms separate from each other and keep them cleaner. A lot of people have ideas about whether it's better for the mushroom to cut it or pick it. It does not matter to the mushroom. The fungi will continue to live on whether you cut it or pick it. I've heard a lot of folk wisdom around this. They've done studies where they picked one side of a trail and cut the other side, and they grew back exactly the same over like a 30-year period. So it doesn't matter. But what I do tell people, if you know what it is just on site, a lot of mushrooms, okay, a bolete, a chanterelle, morel, you can see it from, you know what it is from 5 feet away. You know what it is, you're gonna take it home, cut it, leave the dirt in the ground, keep all your mushrooms cleaner, right? If you don't know what it is and you wanna pick it to learn what it is, pick the mushroom. Wiggle it slowly out of the ground. Some mushrooms, you'll find they have 6 inches of the mushroom buried underground, which can be really important information for identifying mushrooms. So cut if you know what it is and you want to bring it home. Pick it if you want to learn and identify it. And then what mushrooms do you want to pick? If you know what it is, like I said, pick away. If you don't know what it is, I see people go out on forays and they pick every single mushroom in sight, no matter, they don't even know what it is. And I come home, they bring it back on 4. I'm like, you picked 100 of the same toxic mushroom. You probably could have got 3. You know what it is, right? So if you don't know it, just pick some samples. And then maybe this comes with experience, but you want to leave like the rotten or bugged out ones there. You can give them a little squeeze and see if they feel squishy or mushy, and that means they're either rotten or full of bugs, and you can leave those for the deer, right? Some local rules and regulations that are important. By my reading, you can forage for personal consumption on HDPLC lands locally. And then national forests, it's okay to collect for personal use without a permit as well. You just need a permit for commercial harvesting. And then basically in all other local public lands, especially national parks, state parks, and evergreen parks, it's not legal to collect mushrooms. Okay, so how do we actually identify mushrooms? I like to say that mushroom ID is an all 5 senses experience. You need to touch them and feel the texture. Are they slimy? Are they dry? Do they break apart easily? Do the stems peel like string cheese? So all kinds of ways to touch it. You should pull them apart and look at them. Use your eyeballs, obviously, to detect the visual details. A lot of mushrooms have very distinct smells to them, which can be helpful for identifying a few I'll talk about. Taste is important for some mushrooms, a really small handful. I'll talk about that more. And some mushrooms do squeak when you cut them. That's not really important for ID, but I can say it's all 5 senses. Toss any rules of thumb or folk wisdom that you've heard. A lot of people come with these real general, like don't eat any red mushrooms or don't eat any white mushrooms. Those are way too general to be helpful. You'll learn a lot of these rules though as you get more experience, and they're way longer and way more complicated than that. So I'll leave it at that. If you have these like old school rules, just toss those and start over. You also helps to temper your expectations with regards to identifying mushrooms down to an exact species level. I'll talk about some, but there's a lot of mushrooms where the books make it look real simple, but when you read some research papers and stuff, it's actually, there's 100 different mushrooms that all look exactly the same. And you can only tell them apart with a microscope or DNA sequencing. And as you'll go, you'll learn what mushrooms that you can just treat at a genus level and not dive too hard into figuring out exactly what mushroom it is. A lot of people have heard of LBMs and LWMs. As you go for a walk in the woods, that's probably like half of the mushrooms that you'll trip over, little inch-tall brown and white mushrooms. Very few of them are edible. First of all, most things an inch tall are not worth eating anyways. So to play it safe, you could completely disregard LBMs and LWMs wholesale just to begin with, and you're 200% safer just to begin with. Most of them are extremely hard to identify as well without a lot of experience or a microscope. So skip the LBMs and LWMs. Let's see, I skipped the slide. Okay, so like I said earlier, don't be afraid to pick a mushroom for identification purposes. It does help to handle them, look at them closely, smell them, taste them maybe. And you're advancing science and your knowledge of biology, so don't be afraid that you're hurting the forest. Take note of the anatomic details of the mushroom that we talked about earlier, the colors, the patterns, the textures. Take note of the smell, the taste for some, the textural elements. Take note of the surrounding plants and trees. Note any bruising from handling the mushrooms or bleeding from where they're scraped or cut. You can collect a spore print if you need to. I'll talk more about that. Take good photos of the mushroom if you're going to pass them on to a friend or an internet resource or app to help for identification. And then take all that stuff you learned about a mushroom and compare it to a guidebook or a trusted internet resource. That's the basis of mushroom ID. How to take good photos of a mushroom. If you're going to send it to your expert friend or post it up to an app to get people to help you. You want photos of the cap from the top. You want a photo of the side profile. And you want a photo of the bottom. It also helps to get a photo of the mushroom in place, just where it's growing, and kind of the trees and plants around it. It's called an in situ photo. Spore prints. You don't do this for all mushrooms, but it can definitely help you identify a lot of them. You take the cap, put it gill side down on a piece of paper. You can add a little bit of water, cover it with a bowl, wait a few hours, and it'll drop its spores. They'll typically be one of just a handful of colors or somewhere in between, but this can give you more confidence, definitely around what mushroom you're looking at is the one you think it is. And then some safety tips for mushroom identification. As you travel, your realm of mushroom knowledge can change dramatically. I tell you, it changes even between elevations. Some of the things I'm going to tell you here are not exactly relevant for foraging mushrooms at the lower elevations or in the city. And it definitely dramatically changes between regions and absolutely between countries and continents. Don't take strangers' opinions for facts, including my own. Somebody hands you a mushroom off the trail. Hey, this is a bolete, take it home. At least look it up, Google it, get one of these guidebooks, do some more research before you put stuff in your body, right? don't believe everything you read online, especially like in our AI age now. But if I'll talk more about this, but don't take, the first comment you see on Facebook for a fact if you're trying to get help with identification. So seek multiple opinions, and then avoid outdated, low quality, AI written, or guidebooks from other countries in general. And just avoid AI information on mushrooms in general. Some of these apps are okay, but don't ask ChatGPT for help about mushrooms, okay? If you want to get a guidebook, these are probably the best ones to start with in our area. The one on the left is edited by the Colorado Mycological Society, and this is probably the most up-to-date one right now. The one in the middle is really good for learning the different mushroom habitats and kind of finding where they grow. And then this one is just good, whimsical mushroom reading, and it's a lot less dry than the other books. It's not as relevant for our exact region. It's better for California and the Pacific Northwest, but it's just a good read and one of my favorite mushroom books. It still helps for our area. Oops. There's only a few online resources I would trust. The Colorado Mycological Society Facebook page is pretty good. Tons and tons of people post their photos up there and get help from literally the authors of the books on the previous page will comment and help people with their identification. And it's taken pretty seriously too, just in terms of how people help identify mushrooms. And like I said, people sometimes post comments though with totally wrong identifications too. So it helps to wait for multiple people to comment, right? Don't post it. Oh, somebody says, "Oh, eat this," and mushroomexpert.com. This is a good website too. That has really good details on identifying mushrooms, created by a famous mycologist. And then the iNaturalist app. I was going to include a lot more about this, but you can figure out how to use it yourself. It's pretty straightforward. It's probably the only app I would trust in terms of those apps where you take photos and it tells you what mushroom is. Don't trust it entirely, but it actually does a really good job in terms of pointing you in the right direction and giving you a good hint on where to go further, giving you 10 different hints on where you can look further. So don't trust these apps entirely. The best thing about this one is it's also a community of amateurs and professionals that are happy to jump in and help identify your observations that you post on here too. So this is by far my favorite. It's not a mushroom app, it's a biology app, but by far the most useful. Okay, let's talk about eating mushrooms. Almost all mushrooms should be well cooked before eating. And there's some you can eat raw. A lot of people say, what about my salad mushrooms or my grocery store mushrooms? Like I said, most mushrooms. But even if you cook those salad mushrooms, you probably have an easier time digesting them. You want to eat only fresh mushrooms, just as you wouldn't eat rotten fruits or vegetables. You don't want to eat rotten old mushrooms. It's important to know that people can react differently to different mushrooms, even totally benign ones. Some people have trouble with the grocery store mushrooms even, and that's just really important to keep in mind. If it's your first time eating a certain mushroom, you want to eat it in moderation and a small amount. Don't make a whole meal of it in case you react badly. If you do okay, then you're clear to eat more. Some of these tips, like these next two, it may be less relevant if you're 99.999% sure what you're eating and you're a little concerned maybe. But if it's your first time eating mushroom, especially, you may not want to mix it with other mushrooms, just so you know which mushroom is going to cause a bad reaction for you. And then, save a specimen if you're not 150% sure before you eat it. Maybe you need something to provide to poison control later. But if you're not 110% sure, when in doubt, throw it out. Okay, it's not worth giving yourself a panic attack if you eat something you're not 100% sure about. And this happens more than you would think. People have gone on the forays, brought home a completely benign mushroom that's been verified as safe, like a puffball, verified by whoever is leading the foray. Take it home, eat it, start worrying a little bit, start doing some Google research, convince themselves they ate an amanita, give themselves a panic attack, and go to the hospital with mushroom poisoning symptoms from their panic attack. So, when in doubt, throw it out. Let's talk about cooking mushrooms. A lot of people ask, what do you do about bugs? I think there's kind of 4 different ways to handle it. If you're totally squeamish about bugs and worms, and you don't want to eat any mushrooms that a worm has been in, you can just not eat any mushrooms where a bug has traveled through it. And so you probably wouldn't end up eating very many, but you can pick some mushrooms out there that don't have any bugs in them. Some people do that, that's fine. My preference is not to eat wherever any bugs have traveled through the mushroom, so you can do a little bit of surgery and cut the parts out where you see the wormholes in the mushroom. That's my preference. So sit down and dissect them all after I harvest them. Sometimes there's just a little nub left, but sometimes they typically travel from the bottom up, so you can cut just the base off and you get lucky and they just were in the first inch of the mushroom or whatever. Third philosophy, some people don't mind eating where the bugs have been. You can just put it in a bowl of water with salt water for 24 hours, and the bugs will all apparently leave the mushroom, and then you can prep and cook them as usual. Some people do that, and then some people just don't care about bugs and just say more protein and eat the mushrooms, bugs and all. Definitely not my preference, but I know a lot of people that do that actually. Prepping mushrooms, I've heard people say like don't wash mushrooms. You can wash any mushroom, some more easily than others. Some absorb a lot of water, which can be annoying, and then you need to either like dehydrate them briefly for 10 minutes or do dry sauteing with no oil and get the water out of them before you really cook them. But they can all be washed. Cooking methods, saute, the easiest way to taste a new mushroom with a little butter, salt, and pepper. Dehydrating is great if you have too many to eat before they'll go bad. Probably my favorite way for eating some mushrooms I'll talk about later. Deep frying, actually probably my real favorite for eating mushrooms. Canning and pickling also. Some mushrooms can better than others, so a lot of folks do that as well. Just a couple tips. Air fryer makes a great dehydrator. A lot of people don't know their air fryer goes all the way down to like 105 or 120 degrees. You can fill that whole thing up with mushrooms and they'll be totally dehydrated within 24 hours, so no need to buy a dehydrator. Even in our environment here, actually, in Georgetown at least, if you leave some mushrooms out on the counter for 72 hours and cut them up a little bit, they'll be 100% dehydrated just by leaving them out on the counter here with no apparatus necessary. Dry saute, like I talked about, I don't really use that for anything but mushrooms, but put them in a pan without any oil and it'll just dehydrate all the water out of them after like 5-10 minutes. And then add your oil and cook them. And then if you're gonna do deep frying mushrooms, it's a lot better to saute them before you bread and deep fry them for 2 reasons. Just to improve the texture of the mushroom. If you like take a puffball and just cut it up and fry it, they're actually pretty awful. If you saute it first, add some flavor to it, improve the texture a little bit, and then fry it, much better. And then also just for certain mushrooms, like morels need to be really well cooked. Saute them first, make sure it's cooked, and then bread and fry it. A lot of people wanted me to talk about hallucinogenic mushrooms. That's like the #1 question I got when I told people I was doing this talk. I'm not an expert here. There's people in this room that know 10 times more than I do, but there's essentially psychedelics and deliriants, 2 types of hallucinogenic mushrooms, right? Research shows that both may have medicinal benefits, though, for a variety of conditions, depending on, your dosage, right? Definitely do more research than what I tell you here if you're gonna dive into any of this. But the psychedelic mushrooms are typically in the psilocybe, or I've heard it called psilocybe genus. That's what most people are familiar with. They're relatively uncommon in our mountain environment here, but they do grow on rotting wood, but relatively fairly uncommonly, and their locations are closely guarded secrets. But fortunately, they're really easy to grow at home, actually. And I'm not gonna talk, that could be a whole presentation in and of itself, but the psilocybes are really easy to grow at home. Amanita muscaria, everybody's familiar with, probably, I'll show you some photos, but it's incredibly common in the wild here. It grows all over the place in season. And they're all now legal to possess and to share, not to sell, and to use in Colorado. The amanitas were never illegal, but the psilocybes were until recently. This is a photo of our native psilocybe aztecorum. I don't know if these were found exactly around here, but they were found in a mountain, higher elevation environment by a friend of mine. And you can see that these fall solidly into the little brown mushroom category. So it's definitely not a mushroom for beginners to go forage. If you need more experience for this one. They do have some really neat defining features though. They stain blue-black as they're handled. And you can just see some little instances of that here on the edges of the cap here and on the stems here. Really a beautiful mushroom though. And then the Amanita muscaria, which a lot of people are familiar with, the classic Super Mario mushroom with the white dots on the top. There's a stem underneath there. You can't see a white stem. These little white dots are actually like warts. They're remnants of a covering that used to be over the cap, and they can flake off or even wash off in the rain. Sometimes you'll find these without the white dots. Poisonous mushrooms. It's important to know which ones are poisonous before you go start collecting ones to eat. Most mushroom poisoning simply results in gastrointestinal distress, like food poisoning. That's the vast majority of mushroom poisonings, okay? But some mushrooms are truly deadly, even if eaten in extremely small amounts. Some mushroom toxins, some are deactivated by cooking, not all, especially not the most poisonous ones. And then it's important to note that elderly folks, or especially young, or immune compromised or ill people can be especially affected by mushroom poisoning. I wouldn't be afraid for any of these groups of people to eat something common or well known like a bolete, but definitely not a group of people that should play around with experimental mushrooms or ones they don't know or things like that. And so learn what not to collect before you start collecting stuff to eat. So just to start with our local poisonous mushroom, morels. This is just to be inflammatory, but a lot of people don't know these are really toxic if undercooked or not cooked. And a lot of people saw this news article from last year where a lot of people were sickened in Montana and 2 people died eating raw morels at a sushi restaurant. A backpacker also died in the same area eating a morel that he didn't cook well enough in his Jetboil stove in Montana. So there's people in the mushroom club that have permanent liver damage from eating, and these are experienced people, much smarter than me actually, that have permanent liver damage from eating undercooked morels. And so it's really important to cook these well, actually. This is the most poisonous mushroom in the world, the death cap. A lot of people have heard of this one. It's important to know what it looks like, but it has never been found in Colorado. It has been found in neighboring states. So good to know what it looks like, but if you find it, tell a professional mycologist because you've probably discovered something. It has a close cousin, the destroying angel. People have heard of this one. This one's good to know what it looks like too. This one has been found in Colorado, but only a handful of times, and I believe all south of Colorado Springs and all at lower elevations. But it's good to know what this one looks like. It's like white on white, white skirt, white bulb on the bottom, white stem, white cap, white gills. So it's kind of like, okay, there's no edible mushrooms we're looking for that are white from tip to tail, every single feature. Okay, this is another close cousin of the destroying angel, which does grow in our area. Some people, I believe, confuse like the Amanita muscaria for this one, or vice versa. This one's poisonous too, but really just, this tells you to stay away from the Amanita family in general. It's more of an expert group of mushrooms. There is like some edibles in this family, but it's really not worth fooling around with, essentially. The Amanita eggs I showed earlier, that's the earliest growth stage for these mushrooms. Some people will make the mistake of confusing these for puffballs. So it's important to cut your puffballs open. I'll show some more photos later. But cut your puffballs open and make sure there's no fine details on the inside. It can be actually even much more finer than this and less apparent. But somewhat easy to avoid. Eventually your spidey senses will go off if you pick something up, like you think it's a puffball and you know something's weird about it. Cortinaria species, or these are also called web caps. If you go foraging with me, you get sick of hearing this word because it also feels like this is about 50% of the mushrooms that you will find out there some days. They also really suspiciously look like good edible mushrooms from the top, and then you'll flip them over and see their key defining feature, which is this thing called a cortina, this webbing that's underneath the cap here. And so you can see some remnants of it here, and some remnants of it here and here. These cortinarious mushrooms also, not always, but typically have purple and brown features. There's really very few or almost no purple edible mushrooms that we're really looking for around here. There's some, but they're not beginner mushrooms. So really purple mushrooms with webbing under the cap, you can toss all those. against a tree when you pick them up by accident. Here's a close-up of the Cortina here. There's some remnants of it on the cap here, and it's brown because the mushroom has dropped they have brown spores too. It dropped its brown spores on the remnants of the Cortina here that's still hanging onto the cap. And these can be really deadly poisonous too, but they're easy to avoid. But some days it feels like you'll find hundreds of these, and they trick you because it looks like a good mushroom from the top. The deadly Gallerina. This is another super deadly, kill you with like one bite mushroom that grows around here, but super easy to avoid. It's also solidly in the little brown mushroom category, so extremely, extremely easy to avoid. False morel, this is a Gyromitra esculenta, one of many, many false morels. Apparently some people confuse this for the actual morels that we're looking for. I think they need to get their eyes checked. These are much gnarlier, knobby, like an inverse morel, right? In a tan brown color. And they're not hollow on the inside. These contain the same compound as rocket fuel. And apparently, even though they're super poisonous, they're eaten widely in Scandinavia. Apparently, if you pressure cook them, or process them a special way, a certain high heat, they lose their toxin. And it's also believed that it's a different species that's in Scandinavia, but these are widely eaten in Scandinavia. So it's interesting. That one you'll see is really similar to, this is one that I found. This one is one that's probably popping out right around this time at our higher elevations. It's another false morel, which is like a useless common name, right? There's 100 different false morels. And this one is edible though. It's definitely an expert mushroom because it looks kind of so similar to the other one. I don't think it's that similar, but these actually taste really good. But the book says up and down not to eat these. But you do a little research. It's definitely an expert mushroom. Do a little research, read some research papers and stuff. Get more confident, and I ate the heck out of it. And this is like one of the only good edibles that is popping out up here around this time of year. So it's definitely an expert mushroom though. The Rusula emetica. This one is not deadly poisonous, just causes a gastrointestinal upset, but it is apparently in the top 5 mushrooms that send people to the poison hotline in Colorado every year, because people are trying to find another edible mushroom I'll talk about called the shrimp rusula. But really they're easy to avoid. They're bright red and perfectly white, sometimes a little blush on the stem. I'll talk more about what makes a rusula, but they have stems that are hard, almost like a piece of chalk, and brittle gills that flake away when you touch them. And they're also spicy when you taste them. This is one of the only mushrooms that you actually taste to identify it. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But they're just always these perfectly cute little red and white ones. They're like yay tall, even taller, smaller sometimes. So they're actually really easy to avoid. Okay, so let's talk about our top edible local mushrooms finally, my favorites for the most part. Okay, morels, again, number 1. Easy to identify, really safe beginner mushroom. It's hard to go wrong here. They got these craters on the cap. You cut them open and they're hollow in the middle. At the high level, there's blonde ones, there's darker ones. I'm not going to go into the details of all the different morel species here, but it's a great safe beginner mushroom. Just remember they got to be well cooked. There is a wide variety of false morels. They're not all poisonous either, which is what some people think, oh, false morel equals bad. Like a banana is also a false morel, okay? Anything that's not a morel. These are just 3 examples. On the left side, you've got these Verpa species. You can see they're obviously not the morel. They've got a tiny little cap and a long stem. These are actually edible, though. And a lot of people eat these. And in the middle, you've got a Helvella species, which really doesn't look anything like a morel to me. And then on the right, you've got another kind of Gyromitra species, like the ones I showed earlier, which is poisonous. And to me, this doesn't look anything like a morel either. So it's pretty easy to avoid false morels. If you're foraging for morels, use your spider senses. If it looks wrong, it probably is wrong. Boletes. A lot of people know these. A lot of people told me this is the only wild mushroom they've eaten at one time or another. The photo on the left is like the first wild mushroom I ever found in Colorado, and it was huge. So obviously got me into the hobby. These are really, really easy and safe, easy to identify mushroom for beginners as well, because there's essentially almost no poisonous or toxic boletes that grow right in our area here. There's a general rule of thumb for boletes where any toxic boletes will have red or blue colors on the underside here. I've never seen any like that around here. I've seen them elsewhere in the US, but not here. And so that's pretty easy to avoid, really. There's another lookalike to be aware of, I'll show you, but they've got this pore surface on the bottom, hamburger bun looking cap. You can't see these details, but they also have this black circular pattern on the stem called reticulation. That's a good ID. The pore surface goes from yellow to white. They get huge, as big as your head. One lookalike to be aware of is the Lexinum species, or the aspen bolete. Does anybody recognize where that photo is taken from? Yeah, right? These grow prolifically in town here, actually. These grow with aspen trees. To me, they're pretty easy to tell apart from the Boletus rubriceps, which is the one I showed on the previous slide that most people look for. They've got a bright orange cap most of the time. They bruise black as you handle them or cut them, scrape them. They've got these black little things on the stem called scabers that are pretty easy to look for. And they do grow in a variety of shapes, though, including this little mutant baby I found. This mushroom is apparently also in the top 5 that send people to the poison hotline. It affects some people differently than others, and maybe more than some other mushrooms do. The books all say up and down not to eat this one. The quote from the book I showed earlier says, "These send a lot of people to the hospital, so please do not eat them." When you talk to your friends in the mushroom club, you find out actually everybody has eaten them and nobody has any trouble with them. I ate a little bit of it, had no trouble. I ate a whole big one as a meal, also no trouble. So tread lightly for this one, but remember what the book says. Anybody know where that photo is taken? There you go. Anybody know why you wouldn't pick these mushrooms?
Dogs.
Yeah, I took this photo during mountain jams. You wouldn't believe the number of dogs that inspected this area. Yeah, it's in the no zone there. There are very few good edible mushrooms with gills that grow on trees in Colorado. There's like 3 edible ones with gills. Maybe, I could be wrong, but there's really 2 or 3 main ones. And so oysters are really safe and easy to identify species as long as they're growing on trees or logs. They've got this flat shelf-like cap. They typically have little or no stem, and the gills run down the stem, which is kind of uncommon for a mushroom. Sometimes they grow out of the ground, though, on buried stumps or wood, which could make them a little bit more dicey to identify then. You're looking at a larger world of mushrooms then. So if you want to stay totally safe, you can just stick to ones that are growing on dead aspens or cottonwood trees. And these grow in our area quite a bit too. This is the earliest mushroom that pops out in the season too. Like in April, these start coming out in Denver. And even when the weather warms up in the winter, like randomly, it gets 60 degrees in the city, these start popping out in like January, February randomly. People will post on Facebook. Chanterelles, a lot of people know these too. Also an extremely safe and easy to identify mushroom for beginners. There's some lookalikes that grow more prominently elsewhere in the United States, but almost no lookalikes here. If you find a lookalike, your spider senses are going to go off and you'll be like, this isn't a chanterelle, I shouldn't eat it. They have these ridges, these blunt ridges instead of the usual gills, which is the dead giveaway for these. I haven't found them in our area, but other people that live right nearby have told them they found me on their property. So they do grow out here. These are an excellent edible mushroom, definitely a top one. Yeah, great mushroom. This is a photo of a bunch I collected in Indiana, and you can see the ridges are kind of almost invisible on these ones. And That's a different species probably. Also a good example of just how the ones in the middle are little babies. You can see they look quite different from the larger ones. So important to use your imagination and think about how a mushroom can change as it grows. Okay, hedgehog mushrooms. Okay, doing good on time. These are also an excellent edible mushroom. Really good one, and another easy to identify, safe mushroom for beginners. There's really no lookalikes for this one at all that have a tan cap and the teeth underneath the cap. This is the first toothed mushroom we talk about so far. These are an excellent edible, really good. They're just a little smaller in our area than the ones I found elsewhere in the US. This one's probably like an inch tall. It's got a cute little rider here. But a great close-up of the teeth on the bottom of the cap. This is a photo of a handful that I found nearby here. These are so small that the teeth are almost like not even there. But I could still be confident that these were hedgehogs. They have the edge of the cap is enrolled, which is just a minor detail, but it's not uncommon for some mushrooms. But yeah, there's not a lot else that look like these. There's very few mushrooms that have teeth, and they're almost all safe too. So teethed mushrooms are good ones to start with for beginners too. Another toothed mushroom, the hawkswing or the Sarcodon imbricatus. Another really easy to identify, safe mushroom. I keep saying that, but this is another one where there's no lookalikes. And that's what kind of got me excited about this hobby, is when I learned about some of these, like the bolete, the hedgehog, the hawkswing. There are no real lookalikes for these in our area. And so you can feel pretty safe and confident about these ones. It has the extremely unique feature of having this feathered surface on the cap with these kind of upturned little feathers on the surface. This one's a little bit older and waterlogged. These can get huge, as big as your hand or bigger. For this species, the smaller they are, the better they tend to taste. The older, larger ones get bitter. I think it's also suspected that these mushrooms have a cilantro-like property where they taste okay to some people and bad or bitter to other people. They can also grow in little clusters like this sometimes. And here's a close-up of the teeth. It does have a cousin that I have found a few times. Has the same teeth, looks almost like this, but the cap is smooth. It is just tastes bad. It's just bitter. It's not toxic. And you'll know if you find it. If you find like a hawkswing with a smooth cap, you'll be like, this is weird. And so it's just a cousin of this one. And they're not for eating. They taste bad, but they're not poisonous. Puffballs. A lot of people are familiar with these at Silver Plume Mountain in the background there, actually. So these are more than happy to grow in full sun and high alpine environments. This one is broken open like a weird alien egg. And it was perfectly edible on the inside. It kind of developed a skin over the outside. And so puffballs, you want to make sure, cut them open as a beginner, make sure they're perfectly 100% white on the inside, no discoloration or yellowing or black colors or anything like that, and especially no fine details like we talked about earlier that might indicate it's an Amanita egg. I have picked up some like this before that just have a tiny hairline in them. I've only found one, the tiniest of hairlines in it, and it was an Amanita egg. So it can be a really fine detail, but also I cut it open because it kind of freaked me out in the first place. It was like kind of hard. I'm like, this is a weird puffball. Oh wow, it's a really one Amanita in disguise. So they're out there. Puffballs also have a skin around the outside that you want to remove before you cook it because it can cause a digestive upset. I won't make that mistake a third time. Once you know what they look like, though, it's pretty easy to go and grab a handful every time you go for a hike. They're not the finest edible. They actually don't taste like much. They're kind of like tofu, but they'll take on whatever flavor you cook them with. So if you don't find any boletes or whatever, you can definitely bring these home and make tacos. Sometimes they've got a little stalk on them. There's the Calvasia ones typically grow on the ground around here. This is a photo from the Midwest. And then there's another species of puffball, Lycoperdons. These are called gem-studded puffballs. They have this little fine, dusty texture on the outside that rubs off, but otherwise, pretty much just the same as the other puffballs. And there's a close-up of puffballs releasing their spores. I said it's okay to smell mushrooms, but you don't want to inhale any spores from a puffball specifically. It can cause a lung disease called lycoperdiosis. So don't go huffing puffball spores if that's not obvious. This is our new state mushroom. Has anybody heard this? Yeah. This is the emperor, or as I've also heard it called, the prince. It pains me to even tell people about this mushroom because I've been in the woods and sometimes you can see all the good mushrooms have already been cut down and picked, and it's kind of disappointing. They'll all be cut down and picked, and this one will be like a foot tall in the middle of all the already picked mushrooms because people are like afraid of it because it's got gills, and it's kind of gilled mushrooms, maybe not always beginner mushrooms, but this one's fairly easy to ID actually once you get your hands on it a few times. It stains yellow as it's handled. You can see a little bit here on the cap and here. It's got this feathery surface. It's not raised like the hawk's wings, but this feathery kind of pattern on the cap. They get huge, as big as your head. That one's 7 inches across and probably just as tall. This is one where the color of the gills change as it grows. It starts off like a cream color, then goes more of a pink in midlife, and then brown when they're more mature. And they've got a little leftovers of a ring or a skirt on them too. And so just with all those different factors combined, it makes them pretty easy to identify. I'd say it's more of an intermediate mushroom. Once you get your hands on it a few times, you'll see they're pretty apparent. Oops. And so they get as big as your head. They're pretty cool, or fairly small also. And they have some close cousins that are in a group of complex species. What I mean is that they all look visually exactly the same and you can't tell them apart without a microscope or DNA sequencing, but they're still basically all safe to eat up here in the mountains. And so this one I call Agaricus didymus. It doesn't even have a common name to my knowledge. It's just like the one we looked at previously, but without the feathering on the cap. But it stains yellow and the gills are just the same as the other one. It's excellent eating as well. These are probably my favorite wild edible mushroom. The one on the previous slide and these two here. On the right, I didn't have as good photos of this one, but this one is just like the other ones with the feathery pattern on the cap. And it stains red as you cut it or handle it, which is extremely unique as far as mushrooms go. There's like hardly any that stain red as you touch them. So, and it also has a really strong amaretto, like almond smell in some cases, if it's not too old. And so it's just dead giveaways that that's what you have. These are extremely good. I hate even telling people about them. This is a city mushroom. Those have one look-alike that's like well known to be toxic. It's a city mushroom, so may important to be aware of, but it's called the Agaricus xanthodermis or the yellow stainer. It looks a lot like those other ones, right? It stains yellow at the base, but its telltale is that it has a really strong chemical smell to it. And these apparently don't grow up here. I might be suspect if I saw one that was growing in somebody's lawn or city park or something, but otherwise these don't grow up here to my knowledge. And they smell like Windex, strongly. But this is also apparently in the top 5 for sending people to the poison hotline. People get confused with this one grows prolifically in people's yards, like all over the place. So that its commonality alone probably puts it in that category. Okay, and then those are cousins to our grocery store mushrooms. Those are on the same family. Who knows the similarity or difference between these mushrooms? No, not you. No. Yeah, age. Not my mushroom club friends. Yeah. Yes.
They're all the same.
Yes, they're all the same mushroom. They're all Agaricus bisporus, or a grocery store shroom, just in different growth stages. From youngest here is the white button, middle age, old age is the portobello. So it's all a scam. They're all the same mushroom. Okay, the shrimp russula. I talked a little bit about the toxic russula zela. You can see these have kind of a different wine color to the cap. The key thing about the shrimp russulas, their dead giveaway, is they have a really strong fishy, shrimpy smell. These you can smell before you find them a lot of times if they're in their kind of mid-growth stage. They don't smell as much as they get older, but it is strong. And it goes away when you cook them, and they're an excellent, excellent edible. It's definitely more of an intermediate mushroom, just because it's maybe sometimes harder to tell versus the emeticas I talked about earlier. But it's much, if it smells like shrimp and it's a rusula, it's pretty safe. It's an intermediate mushroom though. Rusulas are called brittle gills as a family. They have really brittle gills that flake off as you touch them, which is a telltale sign. The stems snap like chalk cleanly. If you throw them against a tree, they'll explode into a million pieces. They come in all colors from black all the way through wine and red and a variety of mottled colors that mix them. The copper ones, green ones, and white ones. So these are all in the same genus. The green ones are definitely edible. There are basically no green mushrooms out here in Colorado. They're all like rusulas. And if you know it's a rusula and it's green, you can eat it. They're pretty bland. They don't taste like much. They're definitely a second or third tier edible. But I'll pick them if I'm not finding anything else. So green caps, pretty safe. The copper ones are pretty safe too. I'll talk more about this, but rusulas are the only ones that I really taste to figure out what they are and whether I should eat them. Here's a photo of some green ones and some hawkswings that I picked on a little backpacking trip I did nearby and washed them in the lake and ate them with my meal. So the green ones are okay. But this is the only slide I have where I have rules for any mushrooms. Rusula are a complex species where a single one visually can actually be like potentially hundreds of different mushrooms, and you need a microscope or DNA sequencing to figure out what it really is. Where rusulas, like I said, brittle gills, stem to snaps like chalk, but they have a universal taste test for rusula species. And basically, if you taste a little bit of it, spit it out, it could be extremely spicy, like a jalapeno, or a little bit bitter, and those are ones you don't want to eat. And if you know it's a rusula and you taste it and it's not spicy, those are ones that you can eat. And then you don't want to eat black rusulas. But otherwise, if you follow these rules for rusulas, a little bit more intermediate, right? A little bit more work and attention to detail. There are a lot of good edibles in this genus. Honey mushrooms, also a more intermediate mushroom, only because they change appearance so much throughout their growth stages. They can look wildly different from each other at different stages of life and their growing conditions. But some telltales for these: feathered cap, sometimes a bit of a veil left over on the stem, and they've got this yellow staining at the bottom a lot of times. Here's a photo of a bunch I found that are a lot more beat up looking by the weather, a little bit more waterlogged. You can see the remnants of the veil there at the bottom of the cap. What's neat about honey mushrooms is they qualify as the world's largest living organism. There's a patch of honey mushrooms that's 3.5 square miles in Oregon. And so that's just a neat fact about honey mushrooms. Lobster mushrooms, hypomyces. This is another really easy to identify, safe beginner mushroom. I haven't found these around here, but I know other people have. It's actually a parasitic fungus that colonizes another species of mushrooms, the rusulas, and forms this orange crust on the outside, covering up the gills and the cap. It's an extremely good edible, one of the finest, but they are a pain in the butt to clean and to process, I think. The easiest way to find them is by the pound. Even those were a pain to clean. So they do taste really good though. They're worth it. I found them abundantly in the Midwest, but not around here. Swillis species, or slippery jacks as they're commonly called. There's a number of like 6 to 8 different species of these that grow around here. And these are a little bit easier to identify down to their species level, just based on visual details. These are a type of bolete, and they're also they're safe to eat as well. There's like no poisonous ones. This one is called the blue staining slippery jack. I find this all the time around here. It's really easy to tell. It's got a yellow cap, yellow pore surface, yellow stem, a little bit of black scabers, and it stains blue as you handle it, really apparently. And these are kind of a second or third tier edible. They're slimy if you saute them. And so typically I like to dehydrate these. I think that's the best for these in my opinion. There's another good one called the Swillis brevipees, or the short-stalked slippery jack. The first time I found this, I thought it was like a miniature baby bolete, but it's actually this other one. They've got the same kind of brown hamburger bun cap, yellow pore surface underneath, and a short white stem. And this is probably the best tasting of the Swillis species that I've had, but really easy to identify. There's no toxic Swillis around here, so good one to start with. Like I said, they're second tier, so I kind of only bring them home if I haven't found anything else good. This is the Lactarius deliciosus, or the delicious milk cap. Even though it's called that, it's really not that delicious. I put this as like a second or third tier edible as well. I don't know who named it. They love the marshy areas, the wet environments, and so typically I find them a little bit more bugged out too. But sometimes when you find them real small, I found them right around outside town here. And when they're smaller, they're bug-free and good to cook with. But they have a number of telltale signs that make them totally unique, really easy and safe to identify. They have these blue and orange features, which really there's nothing else that has that. And then as you cut or scratch the gills, they will bleed this orange juice from the gills, which is also a telltale sign for these. It has a close cousin, but it doesn't have the blue on it, and it bleeds white instead of orange. And it's not toxic, it just tastes bad. So it's good to be aware of, but this is a really easy one to start with that grows right around here abundantly. Coral mushrooms, I put it in here because it's extremely easy and unique to identify. But you'll see that this one in the books all say up and down, edible with caution, because it's a complex species where there are hundreds that visually look exactly the same, and without a microscope you can't figure out what they are. But if you stick to the yellow ones, they are edible. I do not eat them anymore. I ate a bunch one time and my stomach was upset the next day, so I stopped eating them, but other people eat them with no problems whatsoever from what people I've talked to. They're good for making mushroom jerky. They're kind of a pain to clean, and you don't want to eat any ones that have a gelatinous center. That means they're getting rotten, and so that's a mistake that some people make. But these are just really, really unique. There's nothing else that looks like this. They're yellow, they're white, they're pink sometimes. If you stick to the yellow ones, it's apparently safe to eat. They're eaten around the world too. They have like no popularity in the US, but they're about a basket full in markets in Asia and Latin America, so there's something we're missing there. Wood ears, a lot of people are familiar with from Asian cuisine. These are really easy to identify. These brown cartilage-like structures that grow on our conifer trees, dead conifers. They're very easy to identify too. The only things that look like them are completely different colors, and they're not toxic either. They have that hard cartilage-like feeling to them. Interesting about cooking them, they're probably 95% water, actually. So if you try to saute them, it's like trying to fry an ice cube. If you dehydrate them, you'll be like looking for it and unable to find it after you dehydrate it. Okay, just some other interesting and not necessarily edible but unique local mushrooms. The Purple Fairy Club, this one's a delight to find, very unique looking. These are edible, actually. They just, when you saute them, there's practically nothing left. But you have to check the center of them. It looks like there wouldn't be any room for bugs, but I found ones too that have bugs all up and down them. So, but definitely a joy to find these. It's definitely a bucket list mushroom. The Hydnellum aurantiacum. This is a toothed mushroom that grows on the ground, bright orange surface. It's not edible like those other tooth mushrooms. It'd be like eating a block of wood, but just a neat one to find. Bright orange coloring, pretty rare. It has a close cousin, the blue tooth or Hydnellum ceruleum. This one in this photo is probably like 1.5 feet wide, so they get huge on the ground. Bright blue coloring on the top, which makes them really apparent. It has a cousin that also grows around here that smells amazing, probably my favorite smelling mushroom. It's also blue, looks a lot like this, but a delight to find this one as well. This is a bucket list mushroom for a lot of people. I found this right in our area too, about twice now. Its defining feature, obviously, is the blood that shoots out when you squeeze it. These are just extremely cool. They're not edible, but they are cool. The bird's nest cup, this is not our exact species that grows here. This is a complex species where there's hundreds that look exactly the same visually. But it's a neat one to know. You'll see it on deadwood all the time as you go on hikes. And it just has an extremely unique structure to it with a little cup with the eggs in it. Not edible, still cool. Eyelash cup, this is an extreme close-up of this one. But it grows in our area as well. Just a little orange cup, but if you look at it up close, it's got these little eyelash structures on the edge of it. Scutellina, scutellata. I've heard people in the mushroom club refer to this as scoot. This is one of our snowbank mushrooms that's popping up right now. My friend Alex, who also took like the vast majority of these photos, you'll notice, he brought some that are in our little case here, if you want to take a look. But it's called the snowbank orange peel. It's just unique visually as well. Orange cup with blue on the outside. And kind of like a four-leaf clover, it has a really rare variant. Or I don't know if it's really rare, but rare. Of the same species that's white on the inside and blue on the outside. So consider yourself in luck if you find that. This one's popping out right now under the snowbanks. This is where I said there's things in the presentation that are already out of date. As I was putting the slides together, I found out the name changed for this one from Chamonixia to Lexinum. This is a fairly rare type of truffle mushroom that can be found out here. It's actually an endangered species in the United States, but it's got this different from everything else we've looked at. It's got this truffle-like texture on the inside, and if you notice from the Latin names, it's in the same family as the aspen bolete we looked at earlier. And the interesting thing is that they both stain blue on the outside when you handle them. So maybe a familial similarity there. These are neat. I went on a foray and we found a bunch of them, and they're rare apparently, so I was gonna send them in to the Botanical Society, get it sequenced or whatever, and then a little child ran off with it. I was like, oh, I'm not gonna chase them down. It's okay. There's more. And then the last thing, if you can't find mushrooms, I wanted to cover this. It is really easy to grow your own at home here in our environment. The easiest way is you can buy these grow kits online. You cut a hole in it, spray it with water once a day, and whatever species you'll buy will pop out of the grow block. But you don't get very much out of this method. And then on the right, there's a photo of my brother-in-law watering the mushroom beds that are in our backyard here. You can combine the grain spawn that you buy online with straw and hardwood chips or pellets. Combine it in lasagna-like layers on the ground and keep it moist somewhat for a few months, and you'll have mushrooms pop out, as long as they're in a shady spot. That's the key thing around here in our area. And so we've got to be really shady, is what I found out. I put some in kind of part sun, part shade areas, even with a few hours of sun a day, nothing grew. There's some methods that I haven't done that are just as easy though. The bucket grow people do. These are oyster mushrooms, and they really prefer, just from nature, a vertical growing surface. Makes them a lot easier to harvest, and they're a lot cleaner. I wouldn't recommend growing oysters on the ground. That's what I did, and I'm not gonna do that again either. You can grow them out of logs too. It's fairly easy, but it apparently takes quite a bit longer for the mushrooms to grow and colonize the wood. But you drill holes in it, put the grain spawn in there, fill it with dowel rods, keep it moist, wait years apparently sometimes, and then mushrooms will pop out of it. This is a photo of some wine caps, or Stropharia rugoso annulata, that I harvested from our backyard. These are great because they grow straight up really quickly, and they're quite big. They taste, honestly, me and Allison taste tested these next to a variety of wild mushrooms that I harvested in the same day. These won. So we're replacing all the mushroom beds in our backyard with just these wine caps. They're also really easy to clean. They grow straight up. I cut them off at the base. You don't even have to wash them. And so hope we get more of these. But this is what I would recommend. Wine caps. Okay, so quick call to action. Join the Mycological Society. It's pretty inexpensive. It's only $20 for an individual or $35 for a family membership. They have monthly classes and seminars, and it's a great way to get more experience. If you join the CMS, you get access to the forays, and I would invite you to join me on a foray this summer. I typically assist or lead usually about 6 or so every summer, and we'll take about 20 or 30 people out, usually to locations around here, which is really convenient, and send everybody out for 2 hours. They'll go collect all the mushrooms they can find. We bring them all back, and then we will classify and separate them, organize them, and identify them, and talk about them for another hour. And it's just by far the best way to get hands-on experience and learn your mushrooms, and take your confidence to the next level really quickly, and bring home a couple edible mushrooms too. Okay. Any questions? And after we go through questions, I'm going to do a quick giveaway of 2 of my favorite mushroom books. Yep.
How do deer know what mushrooms?
I don't know. That's like another folk wisdom where, oh, you can eat the ones that the deer are eating, but their stomachs are different than ours. So yeah, who knows? But yeah, you see deer bites all the time out of like the best mushrooms too. So they know something. Yeah. Yes. Oh, or yeah, sorry, you first, and then Mike.
Do you advertise the forays on the Georgetown page? Or?
I don't, because it's more of the Colorado Mycological Society. Sometimes they're advertised on their Facebook page, but yeah, it's less of a town thing and more of a club thing. Yeah, Michael?
Why don't they allow mushroom hunting on federal lands and in the parks and stuff?
I don't know. I think it's like natural resource protection. They probably don't want everybody tearing up the environment, even though I said it's not really harmful ecologically, but I understand, especially in a wilderness area. And there we have things like endangered species. I get it.
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up with that, like, so can you get a scientific permit to go and
I think you can.
do a sampling instead of collection?
Yeah, I believe you can. Yeah, there's people in the club that do more research type activities.
Mhm.
And the difference between a truffle, what is a truffle?
Yeah, like the ones that we eat versus these, or really the truffles, I think the whole large category, and I didn't talk about them at all, right? They're kind of like puffballs that are underground, little ball shapes, and you saw the inside, I wish I had a close-up because it's this extremely dense, like a maze of material. It's really interesting to look at close up. And almost all truffles have that. There is actually a huge variety of truffles that grow out here too, but they're like not the edible truffles to my knowledge. And so when you do look for them enough, you'll find the little balls underground once in a while. They're a different species than this even, but it's a really, really wide world of truffle mushrooms out here, but they're not the good edible ones to my knowledge. Yes, Paul?
I come from southern Montana, Red Lodge Village, and we had 50 acres right on the creek.